In this talk, I'm talking about solar dominance, solar in particular. And what I mean by that as a term is the point at which 50% of global electric power is produced by solar energy plus battery storage. And I'm focusing on solar and not wind and renewables because solar is a unique technology. And in particular, by the mid-2020s, distributed solar, and by that I mean rooftop solar, but not just on residential rooftops, but on warehouses and commercial buildings and on farms and in roadside medians and everywhere you could imagine putting it, plus battery storage, in many places in the world is going to be much cheaper than power from the grid because prices have been falling so fast. And also, unlike with any other electricity source, you don't need a utility for this. You can produce it locally. You don't need centralized power plants. And what that means is that if the utilities don't play, they try to resist this, then millions and millions of companies and people will just start to install their own electric power production units and generate their own power because it's going to be cheaper than buying power from the grid. All right? So solar is unique in that way. And the idea of solar dominance is that every factory, every warehouse, every business, every building, shopping center, house, parking lot, device, farm, everywhere will have solar. So to solve climate, that's the future. That has to happen. And this is a slide from Tony Seba, who is a Silicon Valley entrepreneur and a Stanford professor. And he's very good at articulating how this future might happen. He's got a great video that I can recommend to you online. But it's not just Seba. Most energy analysts, not most, a significant number of them, say the CEO of Shell Oil, McKinsey, the big international consulting firm, are already starting to forecast a solar dominant future, by 2045, by 2055, by 2060. So it's really a question of how soon do we get there. Here's the reason. You can see in this graph that solar prices, since we've started producing this stuff back in the 70s, they've dropped 10% a year every year, just like clockwork. And in addition, the amount of solar on the planet has doubled every 2 to 3 years. Right? So those two forces have led to the point where, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, California homeowners, new homeowners, are going to be getting rooftop solar at 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour within a year or two. Now, I pay 18 cents a kilowatt hour for my power in New York. Average price in the country is 13 or 14 cents. So this relentless reduction in prices is leading to a point where ordinary homeowners are going to be accessing power at 1/5 to 1/7 of what people are paying in the rest of the country. Okay, and this is the kind of disruptive potential that we're talking about. Same thing's happening with battery prices, this storage idea. Just plummeting. And all of this is leading to this sort of a picture, right? Basically, it's showing that the retail price of grid power on average in the country starting today is about maybe 14 cents. It's rising because the grid is old, it needs maintenance, it needs to be upgraded to be smart. It's been putting more pressure on price. But if we look at solar at the utility scale, so these are big solar farms that feed power into the grid, they are already crushing fossil fuels. So in bids in California, in Idaho, and Colorado in the last year or two, we've had solar plus storage plus wind coming in at 2.5 cents, 3 cents a kilowatt hour. The best that fossil fuel's been able to do, 4.5 cents. So these plummeting prices have meant that, a few years ago, solar was expensive, and that's kind of what's in everybody's mindset still. But now, in the marketplace, it's the dominant technology at the utility scale. And it's going to be pretty much every new power plant is going to be either offshore wind or onshore wind or solar going forwards. But what's really interesting is that pretty soon, sometime in the 2020s, in most markets, this rooftop solar, distributed solar, is going to achieve the same level of cost competitiveness and then get cheaper than the grid. All right? And this is this recipe for market disruption that we're talking about. And what you're going to get is increasingly partial grid defection, where anybody who's got access to money and capital is going to start financing people and companies to put up solar and put up batteries, and they're going to make money off of that because it's going to be cheaper than buying it off the grid. And that's the business model that's really going to disrupt our energy system. Now, this could lead to what people call a utility death spiral. Scary for the utilities, where people start to defect from the grid. They're not buying power anymore. The utilities' business model is they don't have enough revenue to maintain the grid. This is a justice issue because if it's just rich people putting in solar and poor people still in the grid, that's not going to work. So we have to figure out how to manage and adjust through that transition. But it's going to be unstoppable if the economics play out the way we think they're going to play out, right? If these trends continue, this is going to be the future. And the bottom line here is, remember how we used to use telephone wires? They're still out there where I live anyway. I got telephone wires going up and down my street. Nobody uses them, right? They're just sitting there. It's an infrastructure that has been abandoned, and that will be the future of the electric grid. Not as soon, not immediately. There's still people going to be, the grid's still going to be critical for the next few decades, and we'll be feeding a lot of renewables into it. But it's exciting. I mean, we're at this moment where we're in a new energy transition where we used to get our power from burning stuff in centralized power plants, and putting it through the wires. We're now going to move to this wireless world where we're going to get power from our rooftops, from our clothes, and our devices. And it's going to end energy poverty in poor countries. It's going to break the monopoly power of the oil companies and the utilities. And fundamentally, it's going to be the foundation for a new era of human liberation that's based on really inexpensive energy available to all humans. So it's really an incredible moment to sort of be at the birth of that. And again, the question is, how soon do we get there? In particular, can we get there by 2030? Because that's what the science tells us we got to do. Okay? So is it possible? I mean, is it even physically possible? And this is the story that would have to play out, right? So in 2018, we're at about 2% global solar, not very much. But remember, it's been doubling every 2 years, right? And if that trend continues, then by 2022 you're at 8%. By 2026 and by 2028 you're at 64% of global capacity of electricity being supplied by solar. So that exponential growth is really powerful. And as Tony Seba says, this is really easy to do on a PowerPoint slide, right? But could this really happen in the real world? And it's easy to think, the utilities are going to oppose this. People are going to object to having solar across their street, local zoning laws. Would there even be enough raw materials to produce this many solar panels that fast? Do we have enough workers to install them, right? And we can talk more about that in the Q&A. But this, really, to get there, we just have to have the continuation of the trends we've seen for 20 years. And that would be driven by the fact that solar plus storage is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And so the market will be sort of rewarding people who are installing solar at crazy rates. That's the vision. Okay? So we'll talk about, is it possible? But at this point, really, I want you just to sort of imagine that this combination of solar plus storage has the potential to be disruptive. I mean, we understand how technologies can spread rapidly, from 0 to 3 or 4% to 80%. And the best example is smartphones in our pockets, right? If you'd asked somebody in 2007, how many people do you think will have a computer in their pocket in 10 years, 2017, right? Well, you never would have gotten to 2.5 billion, right? A third of the people on the planet. But that's what happened. So yeah, just keep that in mind.